Welcome back. We're talking about Ukraine, Russia, and the just concluded G7 summit in Brussels. And joining us here in Washington is David Mercer, a board member with the National Security Network and the head of his own government consulting firm. And from New York, the vice president for studies at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, Douglas Paal. Thanks to both of you for joining us. Douglas Paal, when we look at the president's European tour, it seems to be like yet another reassurance tour. Last month it was Asia, this month it's Europe. Is that what American foreign policy has come down to? The president going around telling the world that we've got your back?
Well, unfortunately, that may be the case. The administration has followed its previous administrations down a path that leads to a very feckless approach to dealing with what the Russians call the near abroad, those states that are close to its borders. We don't have the ability, we don't have the money or the desire really to arm these states into NATO membership. On the other hand, we're not in a position to offer real resistance to Russian efforts to apply its influence and engage in some covert operations in those places, as in Ukraine. And so we're into a very unfortunate period.
David Mercer, some Europeans think that the president is weak on foreign policy, that it's very vacillating in what he says. I want you to take a listen to what Lech Wałęsa, a former president of Poland, leader of the Solidarity movement, and Nobel Prize laureate, this is what he had to say about U.S. foreign policy. Let's watch.
In the past, the United States gave hope to the world. If anything happened, you could always count on help from the United States. But now the United States is leading in military terms, but it is a little weaker from the economic point of view. And in the moral and political sense, it is not a leader. The world is left without leadership, and old organizations such as the UN and NATO are not acting. There is no leadership. That is a very dangerous situation for the world.
Scathing words there from Lech Wałęsa. Has the president articulated a clear, coherent foreign policy, a doctrine, if you will?
I think he has, and he did so last week in West Point, and I think he's done so more through demonstration and through his actions, whether that be in counterterrorism and getting al-Qaeda at bay, also hunting down Osama bin Laden. And if you look at just recent actions in Ukraine, you now have 2/3 of them, of the Russians, moving off the borders of Ukraine. You have sanctions being instituted, which is through the leadership of President Obama, along with the European leadership. So you see a lot of action on his part to let speak for what his foreign policy is, and that is the deliverables to reducing risks and threats to U.S. and European and Asian and Middle Eastern, or if it's Africa, those risks associated with threats by others. And I think that makes for a stability that you can count on and you can stand on going forward.
Douglas, do you buy that in practical terms the president has actually done a lot?
No, I don't. I think the president does not have a strategic focus. He's responding to one thing after another, and in many ways he's still fighting the political battles of 2008 when he was trying to turn America around from the obviously unsuccessful approaches to Iraq and Afghanistan that the George W. Bush administration tried. There was nothing in that speech at West Point, for example, about Russia or China. If that was a strategic speech, you have to ask, since the breakthrough with China in the 1970s, the U.S. tried to have better relations with the Russians and the Chinese than they had with each other. The immediate aftermath of the Ukrainian episode is that Russia and China are growing closer economically, militarily, and in other respects.
Right. I guess the point we should address here, David, is the president articulating a foreign policy, or is he responding to these crises that pop up all over the world?
Well, to Doug's point, in reference to the wars, which we might have fumbled ourselves into, there were no weapons of mass destruction. Some of the intelligence was faulty, and we spent 10+ years there with also financial resources expended in addition to the lives lost. That has now been on the course to winding down. That is a huge development, and what the American people called for, and one of the reasons that President Obama not only got elected in 2008, but got reelected in 2012. And that therefore affords other resources to focus on Asia, to focus on Europe, and to be prepared and to create the environment, which is why he's is in Europe now with the G7 leaders. And I might point out in response to Doug that we now have a G7. We do not have a G8 minus a member being Russia from 1997 until what happened in Ukraine. And if anybody's united Europe and the United States, that would be Putin himself.
Okay, Douglas, I want a quick response from you to that, and then I have another question for you about the money that the president has just earmarked to improve military capabilities in Europe.
Well, on the money, the money is chump change. It's small amounts spread over 10 countries. $1 billion is not much. It's mere symbolism. The problem is that the Europeans, both the frontline states and the ones deeper in Europe, are unwilling to spend the money that America spends regularly in order to take care of their own defenses. And their special focus on the resistance goes to the first part of your question, which is where the French, while they joined the G7 meeting and they've agreed that Putin should not be taking part in the G8 meeting, the French nonetheless are going ahead with the sales of billions of dollars worth of naval ships, military ships, to Russia. We're not on one sheet of music in Europe in the NATO alliance, and we keep seeing that as these meetings unfold, where on the one hand they say we're united, on the other hand they pursue their specific national interests.
Hasn't that really undercut Atlantic unity, the fact that the French are going ahead with that sale?
Well, let me make the point that this does not fall solely on the shoulders of the United States, that being European security or the NATO alliance. There are other members. There's France, there's Britain, there's Germany. Germany has not gone through the austerity that France or Britain have. They can be increasing their military budgets to provide for their own security, because peace is a lot cheaper and less expensive to maintain now than it is for conflicts to emerge in Europe. And it's time now, and the economics are improving in countries like Germany for them to assure their own peace of neighbors as well as themselves. And it's not the U.S. alone trying to do so. And that is, I think, the message that the Europeans are receiving from the G7 meeting and the president himself.
Yeah, but the argument could also be made from the Germans that the German leadership doesn't really have its people on its side when it comes to increasing defense expenditure. There's something like 37% of Germans now want to get involved in any kind of foreign adventure.
But, well, I think with economic security and the economic prosperity that Germany has been experiencing of late, especially relative to the other EU nations, that they now may be more comfortable and more open to that, especially when the alternative, as we've seen as possibilities with Ukraine and others, create destabilization at a point where it also threatens economic security and prosperity that they're experiencing now. So again, I would say invest now rather than pay more later.
Okay, Douglas, I just want to go back to the money that we were talking about that President Obama says he's going to ask Congress for to beef up security in Europe, especially Eastern Europe. Let's take a listen to what the president said about that.
We'll increase the number of American personnel, Army and Air Force units, continuously rotating through allied countries in Central and Eastern Europe. And we will be stepping up our partnerships with friends like Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia as they provide for their own defense. I'm calling on Congress to approve up to $1 billion to support this effort, which will be a powerful demonstration of America's unshakable commitment to our NATO allies.
There you go, Douglas, a powerful demonstration of America's unshakable commitment to NATO allies.
Well, it's better than no commitment at all. The countries out there are rattled by what Putin has done. Putin's is like a wolf that's going out and picking the sheep off on the plains of Central Europe. They know that they could be next, and they want to see us demonstrate support. So the president's doing the minimum necessary. The problem is that I think we're really on the wrong policy approach, and it's not today's to turn around. It's something that should have been closely monitored from the top throughout this administration. What is the goal with Russia? Do we want them to be part of Europe, or do we want them to be separated from Europe? Putin has not been helpful. It's a difficult challenge for anybody, but the idea that we were in fomenting upsets in Ukraine for purposes of trying to move Ukraine to a more pro-Western position without taking into account Russian concerns about their security fed into Putin's own personal and regime desire to reassert itself in its near abroad. And we need to have people who can stand back and take a more Olympian view of this. People on the order of George Kennan, who argued against precisely the kinds of things that led up to this crisis with Russia.
So, David, this is a bit of a balancing act for the president, isn't it? On the one hand, he wants to deal with Russia. On the other hand, he doesn't want to isolate Russia completely. I mean, he has said we are interested in good relations with Russia.
And those relations, to a point, served our interests in Syria as it related to the chemical weapons. And that was a pivotal turning point in the policy to weaken, if not to hold President Assad back from the use of those chemical weapons. But again, Putin has other agenda items, and you got to manage those relationships. But I think that overall, that we need to invest in what he is. Look, from 1962, we had 270,000 troops in Europe, and we still now, while we only have 85% of that existing, we are still doing the majority of the budget in NATO. So this is to sustain what our commitment is to Europe, but at the same time, Europeans themselves have to, now coming out of austerity measures, can build up themselves and invest militarily, as I had mentioned earlier, Germany is fully capable of doing. And at the same time, on a policy front, you know, they were united, the U.S., France, and Britain on Libya, but it was Germany that abstained. I think that we need to see an evolution to the point where Germany starts stepping up more because they're more capable as well to do so.
Okay, gentlemen, that's where we're going to have to leave it. Douglas Paal, David Mercer, thanks for joining us. Time for a break right now. Coming up next, we'll get the view from Europe. Stay with us here on The Heat.